So can critical thinking and agility, the type that's sort of thrown around in regards to startups, can those two things coexist?
Definitely. In fact, in the presentation that Russ Unger and I gave, we actually talked about the idea of the MVP, or minimum viable product, which was a phrase I hadn't learned until a couple weeks ago. And I'd just been talking about what can you build in a weekend. And I think that's an example of embracing a constraint. I think when we have constraints like that, a constraint of time, for example, we see opportunities. In fact, we had a whole section where we spent 30 minutes talking about how constraints are actually a really good thing, and something to be embraced and not run from. In fact, I prefer projects that have constraints versus those that don't, because if they don't have constraints, you don't know where to start. Now, all that said, another thing we talked about was the importance of play. And I think with when you get so focused on agility and speed and efficiency, unless you internally are really good at coming up with genius ideas every time, you really have to develop that habit of play and that habit of just looking at things from different perspectives, which a lot of people don't do. In fact, when I went through design school, my original degree was going to be advertising. And we'd have exercises where for this particular ad, we'd have to come back with 100 thumbnail sketches, 100 different ideas, different concepts. And you're lucky to find people who come up with 5 different screen concepts, these days. And I just think there's something lost by not spending a lot of time playing or exploring things from a lot of different perspectives. Right. So yes, critical thinking and agility can definitely work together, but you still need room for play and exploration and evaluation and looking at things from different perspectives.
Now, you touched on this a little bit, but how does critical thinking apply to the user experience?
Certainly. So a little background on the talk that Russ and I gave. We were having dinner with a group of other folks after an event last year, and we started talking about wireframes and the tools and the processes that a lot of trained user experience folks use. And one of the things we were lamenting is these days everyone's talking about the tools. Tell me how to use the tool. Tell me how to do tell me the right way to wireframe. In fact, that's a presentation he and some others have given. And the point of that presentation is there is no one right way. And during our conversation, I said, well, I don't wireframe. That's not part of my process. And we started talking about process and this and that. And the conclusion we came to was it's not about the tools. It's about the thought process that led to the tools in the first place. And that's what's missing from a lot of people entering the field today, entering the field of UX, is there's a real hunger and a thirst to know the right way to do things. But there is no right way. It's really a mindset that you have to have, the ability to spot a problem or see an opportunity and say, hey, we need a way to solve this and create those tools. And so that's really what we talked about, are some of the thinking skills that critical thinkers have. And that's where really we think a lot of user experience designers should focus on, not the tools, but the thinking process to allow you to create your own tools or create hybrid versions of tools that are out there.
So what's your take on game mechanics? Is that a phrase that's in danger of being co-opted into a social media buzzword?
It's definitely a popular meme right now. So I actually have a talk on I call it my Beyond Gamification talk. I tend to focus on the psychology behind things. So if I'm looking at games and why do games work, I want to know why do they, what's the motivations behind those? Like if someone gets motivated by a badge or points, why is that? And I think when you look at that, then you're talking about intrinsic and extrinsic motivations. And it's a whole different discussion that goes back to, a century worth of psychology and studies. And I do see some things that work in a gaming environment that don't translate well to the real world. And I think games and adding a game layer to activity, a business activity, for example, can be fun and maybe extend the enjoyment or the engagement, but it still falls off. Games end. And so what I really like to look at is what are the things that can sustain behavior and sustain growth. And that one's a lot tougher. That's a lot tougher nut to crack. And that really gets to why do we stay in a marriage, for example?
Sure.
I talk a lot about seductive interaction design, and I use the dating analogy and talk about ways to get to know each other. But if you roll the clock forward and fast forward, why are people still together after 25 years? Obviously, it's fun to still get delighters from your spouse. It may not be roses or chocolates anymore. It may be something new. Those are still important, but those aren't the things that keep you together. And so when you talk about gamification and sustaining interest and all that, it can drag out that engagement, but it's not what makes loyal customers, keeps people engaged.
So last question I have for you, and I think it ties into a little bit what you were just saying. Are there examples of companies or products that do a good job of maintaining loyal users, not just getting them, but actually, sustaining that relationship.
Yeah, so I do draw a distinction between loyal engagers and passionate users or passionate customers. And I think if we look at product design or we look at environmental design or some of these other things, there are definitely products I could ask you about that your eyes would light up about and you'd get excited. You'd tell me how you love it. It's part of your identity. When I started surveying people and asking people about products startup web apps that they've used for more than 2 or 3 years and why, it was a bit surprising that everything that came back, there were a lot of very utilitarian products that people use, but they don't use them. They're not excited about them. They're loyal, or maybe they use them, but the reasons were things like it's reliable, or it always works, or it's what my friends use, or it's all these very boring reasons. And what I was looking for was I love it, or it makes me smile, or I laugh, or it makes me feel complete, or all these deeper things. And I didn't see any of that. And it's not that there's not room for it, because there definitely is if you look at like product design, industrial design, those spaces. And so that's really where I'm keeping an eye out for web apps that engage people in an emotional way. I think if you look at a company like MailChimp, for example, I think they're doing that, where it's an email management system, a business app, but I laugh every time their mascot, Freddie, has a little quote or does something. I mean, it's just, they're engaging with me in an emotional way. And I think there's very few sites doing that. There are a lot of sites that people will play with for a few weeks and enjoy, but then whatever made them smile fades or goes away. So I think that's really the next thing we look forward to is apps that people still use after 3, 4, 5, 10 years that they still love and enjoy and talk about and share with others.
Interesting. Well, thank you very much for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, my pleasure.